Hello, I'm Chris Bottger and welcome back to another album review. Today I'm going to be reviewing Led Zeppelin's 1976 live album, The Song Remains the Same. This is the soundtrack album to the Led Zeppelin concert film, The Song Remains the Same. I've actually seen this film and I would say it was pretty good, albeit a little overly strange in places. Still, what I'm here to talk about today is the music. The Song Remains the Same is the only official live album Led Zeppelin released when actually together. As such, for a long time this album, along with the film, carried the burden of being the only proof of how Led Zeppelin sounded live. This album was recorded just shortly after the release of 1973's Houses of the Holy studio album, so we don't see any songs from Led Zeppelin's catalogue after that. I will break the album down song by song before giving my thoughts and ranking of the album as a whole later on in this video. I would like to encourage everyone to bear with me and watch the whole video. Without further ado, let's hop right into it. Rock and Roll makes sense as a good song to set this off right. Despite that, this performance isn't great. The playing from the band is good at least, but Plant's vocal sounds quite weak. He sounds quite hoarse and almost like he's suffering from congestion. He isn't quite able to scream properly here, failing to really meet the demands of the material. As a result, The Song Remains the Same starts off on a disappointing foot. Celebration Day has the exact same problem. This song really requires Plant to belt it out, really propel his voice forward on the chorus. But here it feels like his voice is just crawling along, barely able to do anything. The playing from the rest of the band here is great at least. The playing is very fast and furious, perhaps a bit less hard than on the studio recording, but more sharp in a way. The Song Remains the Same is the title track of this album. The song certainly remains the same as the studio track, but sounds a bit heavier and has more feedback. Page manages to outdo the studio track in guitar theatrics, and the song sounds really good. Sure, Robert Plant sounds like he's about to fall asleep during most of this, but this song always has a bit of a dreamy vibe to it. Plant's vocal here is also not sped up like on the studio track. This has the effect of a live vocal actually sounding deeper than the studio version, as opposed to almost every other song where the opposite is true. I've never really understood why the vocal is sped up on the studio recording of The Song Remains the Same, other than I always assumed someone in the studio must have gotten a kick out of Robert Plant sounding like a cartoon character. It's never really bothered me, it was just a thing that was. Still, I quite like having this live version to hear it with a more proper vocal from Plant. As such, I actually quite like this version of The Song Remains the Same, and I think it sounds really good. The Rain song is a personal favourite of mine from Led Zeppelin's Houses of the Holy album, so part of me was relieved it made the cut onto this album. Plant's vocal is on par with the studio recording, but this never really was a showcase for him. All he has to do here is read off the lyrics while the rest of the band is supposed to make the real magic happen. Other than the vocal, John Bonham's drum work is perhaps the only thing not watered down on this version of the Rain song. Bonham is as sharp as ever, and helps carry this performance, especially towards the end. John Paul Jones's synthesizer is a bit too loud and overindulgent at points. Jimmy Page's guitar work should float atop the synth, not be drenched by it. Page's guitar work here also feels less precise than on the studio recording, feeling splintered in a way. Due to Page and Jones's failings, the short focus of the studio recording of the Rain song has instead turned murky, leaving the song a decent imitation of unrealized potential. This album's version of Dazed and Confused starts out with good playing from the band, but soon devolves into a bit of a mess. Plant sounds very high-pitched and nasally here, which occasionally works but isn't quite right for this song. His vocal quote-unquote improvisations sound overly rehearsed and forced. What is the obsession with the number 25 anyways? After a while, the song devolves into all sorts of random stuff. Filler instrumental sections, Jimmy Page playing around with high-tech toys, awkward silence, you name it. After a while, Plant comes back in to do the thing where he wails along with the guitar, like on the studio track. This is a bit too drawn out and slow-paced, but at least feels justified, unlike all of Jimmy Page's swoosh effects that follow. The band does eventually break back into their groove, which only serves to startle me back awake. But, again, Plant tries to vocalize with the guitar, but his voice is sounding increasingly strained by this point in the song. We also get a funky part with a good guitar solo from Page, but at this point the song then does some false starts and stops, with Plant going back to try to vocalize with the guitar. As the rest of the band wind back up into better and better playing here, Plant's performance is slowly going down the drain. Eventually, the song meanders its way back into being Dazed and Confused, but by that point, it has been a bunch of random, unconnected improvisation longer than it actually was Dazed and Confused at the beginning. I'm not sure why Led Zeppelin felt the need to extend Dazed and Confused over 4 times its original length. A lot of this doesn't even resemble the track it's supposed to be, at least if the track listing is to be believed. The lull in the middle is inexcusable, and while the song does get better towards the end, I don't really see the need of having any of this. Most of this really was just wasted space on the album. If we really needed a bunch of improvisation to take up a side of an LP here, I would have loved to see some of the groovy reports that Led Zeppelin 1 make a comeback, such as How Many More Times. Instead, what we get is a snooze fest with some mild Dazed and Confused themed set dressing on either side. Now, before we go on to the second half of the album, I want to remind you that if you like this style of album review, to please like this video by hitting the thumbs up button below, hit the subscribe button, and consider watching some of my other videos after this one is through, as all these things help me out a lot. No Quarrel starts off with a good groove to it, lumbering yet mobile, just like it should sound. After a while, it mellows out in an appropriate manner before sliding back along with a real venom to it. No Quarrel has never been one of my favorites, but it is delivered well here. It doesn't really stand out from the studio recording, but is at least on par with it. Now, we have the obligatory Stairway to Heaven performance. This is perhaps the most solid performance we've covered yet. Robert Plant and Jimmy Page are both in top form here. Plant has a good rapport with the audience, and his screaming actually sounds good for the first time on this album. The guitar solo between the softer sections and the harder ones is extended, and we have some really good work from not just Page, but also John Bonham and John Paul Jones during this section. Other than the extended solo, there isn't anything mind-blowing here. The song mostly sounds like the studio recording, just with audience noises in the background. Still, I'm sure this would have been cool to hear live, as it is up there with the studio version. This version of Stairway to Heaven isn't really a must-have when it comes to having it in recorded form, but does show Led Zeppelin pulling their weight as a live band, really pulling out all the stops for their audience. If all the tracks on the song remains the same like this, then we'd have a fantastic album here. Moby Dick is John Bonham's drum showcase song from Led Zeppelin 2. Despite this being a studio track in the past, this sort of song is built to thrive in a live setting like this. John Bonham is always the most consistent member of Led Zeppelin, and that has been doubly true throughout this album. He once again does not disappoint. Moby Dick is the only song on The Song Remains the Same that truly justifies its own existence, as a performance that has an actual warmth and re-listenability apart from its studio counterpart. It's a little long, sure, but it's certainly the freshest part of this album, and the epic finale makes the build-up worth it. Whole Lotta Love is a solid way to end off the album. I suppose this version does have some value, as you can hear what this song would sound like without the plane effects from the studio recording. An early part is mashed up with the crunge from Houses of the Holy. I've never liked that song, but luckily the presence of the crunge is kept to a relative minimum here. Any of the crunge is too much, but at least there isn't more. Glass half full. Whole Lotta Love then goes into its breakdown section, which is replicated surprisingly well in this live setting. We then get some nice blues rambling stuff from Robert Plant and some furious stuff from the band. At this point, the song does start to deviate and become a different track altogether, even though the track listing says this is all just Whole Lotta Love. Eventually we get back to Whole Lotta Love, and we close the album off on a relative high note. There's nothing mind-blowing to this performance, but nevertheless, it is good. Alright, that's it for the song-by-song breakdown. So now, before we go on to my final thoughts on the album, let's look at my final scores of the songs. Now, I'm assigning these scores not based on the overall composition of the songs, but instead on the quality of the live performances here. I give Rock and Roll, 6 out of 10. Celebration Day, 6 out of 10. The Song Remains the Same, 8 out of 10. The Wayne Song, 7 out of 10. Dazed and Confused, 4 out of 10. No Quarrel, 7 out of 10. Stairway to Heaven, 8 out of 10. Moby Dick, 8 out of 10. Whole Lotta Love, 7 out of 10. The closest The Song Remains the Same gets to being a great live album is either on the title track, Moby Dick, or Stairway to Heaven. These are performances that are well and above worthy of being committed to vinyl, and are a treat for any fan of Led Zeppelin. Some of the other songs, like Whole Lotta Love and No Quarrel, are good performances, but hardly standouts compared to the studio versions. On the other hand, this album also has a lot of failings. Robert Plant's voice is hoarse on several of the songs, taking a lot of the oomph that should have been there out of tracks like Celebration Day. Page is overindulgent at times, wasting time goofing off on the absolutely horrid 26-minute long version of Dazed and Confused that takes up the entirety of side 2 of the album. John Paul Jones also overdoes the keyboard parts on several tracks, leaving some of the songs feeling quite dull. The track listing is overly slanted in favor of songs from Houses of the Holy. Led Zeppelin's First and Third albums only have one song each on the album, which is a real shame. Poor choices in the length of the tracks included results in The Song Remains the Same having a strange and ineffective track listing being spread across its 2 LPs. The pacing is quite weak and certainly isn't helped by the fact that there was a lot of dead air at times, especially on side 2. In the end, this track listing just doesn't work, often feeling tedious to listen to. So, in the end, The Song Remains the Same is a lackluster product, mashing together little bits of Led Zeppelin, the good, the bad, and everything in between. From the band's overindulgences to the poorly chosen track listing, there's almost enough bad to outweigh the good, leaving this album a shaky 6 out of 10. Sometimes bad, often good, rarely great. And of course, as always, before we end, I do want to look at the sleeve. So, in the front, you got a picture of this building. It's my understanding this is where the band will host for their live performances. But it's very stylized and artsy. That's kind of nice. It doesn't exactly scream Led Zeppelin. Of course, we got this big black border as well. Got the Swan Song logo down there. That's nice. Got Led Zeppelin's logo. On the back, you have something very similar as well as the track listing. This is also in a gatefold sleeve. You've got over there, kind of the same picture like on the front. We've got a bit more of a border. Over here, you've got more kind of text. So that's nice. And this over here is actually a little booklet. So there is images of the band and stuff in here. And, you know, you can kind of flip through that. I'm not going to show all of that, but it's quite nice. You've got in the track listing kind of notes in here. So yeah, that's pretty nice. The liners really aren't anything special, but they're all printed black. This is no different than your standard paper liner. It doesn't have any hole in the middle, it's just kind of black paper. But it does match the outside of the sleeve here quite well, so I do appreciate the commitment to kind of keeping the overall aesthetic design kind of consistent. So yeah, there we go. It's a decent album cover, but it's not like one of my favorite packages, but I do appreciate the little book in there, in the gatefold. Alright, that's it for today. I want to thank everyone who watched this for watching. I really do appreciate it if you made it this far in the video. Be sure to like and subscribe, that helps me out a great deal. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.